Most people who heard what Tanya did called her a bad mother. They had no idea she was the best one in the room. It was the coldest night of the year in Chicago. Inside a tiny broken apartment on the south side, a little girl lay on a thin mattress on the floor. She was 10 years old. She had not eaten properly in 4 days. Her lips were dry. Her body was weak. And the only sound in the entire apartment was her small, struggling breath going in and out in the dark. Her mother sat beside her on the cold floor and watched her. Not because she had nothing else to do. Because she could not bring herself to look away. Like if she stopped watching even for a second, something terrible would happen. Then the little girl opened her eyes slowly, found her mother's face in the darkness, and whispered the 4 words that changed everything. "Mommy, I'm so hungry." Her mother did not answer right away. She simply pulled her daughter into her arms and held her so tightly that the little girl stopped shivering. And in the dark where nobody could see her face, she cried without making a single sound, because she had nothing to give this child. Not a piece of bread, not a warm drink, not an honest promise that tomorrow would be different. That night she made a phone call that would haunt her for 18 years. And 3 days later she walked out of her room while her daughter screamed her name down an empty hallway. 18 years passed. Then one quiet evening she looked up at a television screen in a small diner on the south side and saw her daughter's face looking back at her. Alive, successful, beautiful, wearing a white doctor's coat, and crying on national television asking one question. "Mama, where are you?" Stay right here until the very end of this story, because what happens next will break your heart completely, and then heal it in a way you did not expect. 2 years before that terrible night, Tanya Williams had a real life. Not a rich life, but a real and warm one. She had a small, clean apartment with curtains on the windows and a kitchen that always smelled like something good was cooking. She had a daughter who laughed loudly and drew pictures on every surface she could reach and asked questions about absolutely everything. And she had Marcus. Marcus Williams was not the kind of man who took up a lot of space in a room. He was quiet and steady and solid. He worked long shifts at a big warehouse on the east side and came home every evening with tired eyes and heavy boots and the same gentle smile he saved only for his family. He was not a rich man or a famous man. He just wanted to come home to his wife and his daughter every single evening. That was enough for him. It was more than enough for Tanya. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March, a heavy metal storage shelf at the warehouse came loose from the wall. Marcus was standing directly underneath it. He died before the ambulance arrived. He was 31 years old. Tanya got the phone call while she was cooking dinner. She stood in the kitchen, holding the phone long after the voice on the other end had stopped talking. The pot on the stove boiled over. She did not move. Little Jada came running into the kitchen at the sound of the bubbling water. She looked at the stove. Then she looked at her mother's face. And even at 8 years old she understood that something had broken that could not be fixed. She walked over and turned off the stove herself. Then she took her mother's hand and stood beside her in the quiet kitchen. Neither of them spoke. After that, everything in their lives fell apart one piece at a time. No compensation came from the warehouse. No investigation followed. Just a box of Marcus's belongings left at the front door and a world that kept moving like he had never existed. First the money ran out. Then they lost their apartment. Then Tanya lost her cleaning job because she had no one to watch Jada while she worked nights. She found new work wherever she could. Washing dishes during the day, scrubbing office floors at night. She pushed her body harder than it was built to go every single day. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. The hunger started small. Smaller portions at dinner. Skipping breakfast to save food for Jada. Pretending she had already eaten when she had not. Then it stopped being small. And that is how they ended up on that cold floor on that cold night with nothing left at all. The morning after that terrible night, Tanya dressed Jada in every warm piece of clothing they owned and took her outside into the freezing cold. She was going to find work. She was going to find something. She knocked on every door she could find. Restaurants, shops, office buildings. Every single one said the same thing. Nothing available. Try somewhere else. We are fully staffed. By the afternoon, Jada's small legs had given out completely. Tanya picked her up and carried her on her hip, even though her own arms were shaking from exhaustion. Head down against the freezing wind, she kept walking. She did not know where she was going anymore. She was just moving, because stopping felt like giving up. That is when she heard a car slow down beside her on the road. She ignored it at first. Then a door opened, and footsteps came toward her on the pavement. "Excuse me." Tanya stopped and turned. A woman stood a few feet away from her. Her name was Madison Blake, and she was the kind of woman who made you aware of everything you did not have simply by standing near you. She wore a long, expensive coat, and her hair was perfect despite the wind. She looked warm and unhurried and completely untouched by the kind of cold that was eating through Tanya's thin jacket. But when Madison's eyes moved from Tanya's face to Jada's, something shifted in her expression immediately. The polished composure softened into something that looked very much like genuine concern. She looked at the little girl carefully, at her hollow cheeks, at her dry, cracked lips, at the way she hung limply against her mother's shoulder like a doll that had lost its stuffing. "How long has she been like this?" Madison asked quietly. Tanya stiffened. "She is fine." Madison looked at her directly, not unkindly, just honestly. "She is not fine. She is malnourished." Tanya pulled Jada closer and looked away. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were burning. Because she knew Madison was right, and hearing it out loud from a stranger felt like being cut open on a public street. Madison spoke again in a calm and gentle voice. "I know you do not know me, and I know this is not easy to hear. But my husband and I have been trying to have a child for many years, and it has not happened." She paused. "We have a warm home, a good school nearby, food on the table every single day. We could give her everything she needs to grow up healthy and strong." Tanya turned back to face her. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was hard. "She is my daughter." "I know," Madison said softly, "and I can see exactly how much you love her. That is why I am standing here talking to you, instead of walking away." She reached into her coat pocket and held out a small white card. "I am not asking you to decide anything today, but please take this. And if things get worse, call me." Tanya looked at the card for a long moment. Then she took it without saying a word. Madison looked at Jada one more time. Her eyes were glassy. She pressed her lips together and looked away quickly before anything could spill over. Then she got back into her car and drove away. Tanya stood on the cold pavement holding the card. The wind pulled at her jacket. Jada stirred against her shoulder. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "Nobody, baby," Tanya whispered. But her hand closed tightly around the card, and she did not throw it away. 6 days later, Jada collapsed. She was trying to get up from her mattress in the morning, and her legs simply gave out underneath her. She hit the floor and did not get back up. Tanya was across the room in an instant. She scooped her daughter up off the floor and ran. She did not wait for a bus. She did not stop to put on her own coat properly. She just ran 4 blocks through the freezing cold, carrying her 10-year-old child, until she reached the free health clinic on the corner of their street. The doctor on duty that morning was a calm older man who had seen a great many difficult things in that clinic over the years. He examined Jada slowly and carefully. He checked her eyes and her skin and her weight and her blood pressure. And when he was finished, he stood up and looked at Tanya with a specific expression that doctors wear when the news is serious and they are trying to deliver it without causing panic. "She is severely malnourished," he said. "Her body is beginning to shut down from lack of proper nutrition." Tanya gripped the edge of the examination table. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked. Her voice was steady. Her insides were not. The doctor looked at her directly. "It means that if her situation does not change very soon, she will not recover." The room tilted. Tanya sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. She looked at her daughter lying on the examination table. Jada was awake and watching her mother's face with quiet, worried eyes. She had heard everything. Tanya smiled at her immediately. A big, warm, convincing smile that took everything she had to produce. "It is okay, baby. You are going to be okay. Jada searched her mother's face for a moment. Then she reached out her small, thin hand. Tanya took it and held it tightly, and kept smiling, until the doctor stepped out of the room. The moment the door closed behind him, Tanya bent forward in the chair and put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook violently. She pressed her palms hard against her eyes. She sat like that for a long time. Then she sat up straight, wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a slow breath, and reached into her pocket for Madison Blake's card. That night, after Jada had been given fluids and allowed to rest, Tanya stepped outside the clinic into the cold night air. She stood under a streetlight with the card in her shaking hand. She stared at the number for a long time. Every part of her was fighting against what she was about to do. Then she dialed. Madison answered after 3 rings. Her voice was calm and awake even at that late hour. Later, Tanya would find out that Madison had not been sleeping well since the day she saw them on the street. She had asked a social worker she knew personally to quietly check on families in the area. She had thought about Jada every single day. She was not sitting by the phone waiting out of calculation or manipulation. She was waiting because a little girl's face had gotten inside her heart and refused to leave. They talked for a long time that night, and by the time Tanya hung up and went back inside to sit beside her sleeping daughter, the decision had been made. She did not sleep at all that night. She just sat beside Jada and watched her breathe, and memorized her face in the dim light. The process did not happen quickly. A social worker was assigned to the case within the week. There were meetings and home visits and documents spread across several weeks. Madison and her husband were thoroughly reviewed and approved by the authorities. At every single step of the process, Tanya was counseled and reminded clearly that she could change her mind. She did not change her mind, not because she did not want to, but because every time she sat beside Jada and watched her slowly getting stronger on the small meals the clinic was providing, she knew with terrible certainty what the right thing was. The day the final papers were signed, the room was too bright and too quiet. Official people sat around an official table with official documents. Jada sat beside her mother in a chair that was too big for her. She was wearing her best dress. She did not fully understand what was happening. She just knew that her mother had been very quiet for several weeks, and that the quietness felt like it was building toward something. She held Tanya's hand under the table the entire time. When the last signature was done, one of the officials began explaining what would happen next. Jada looked up at her mother. "Mommy, where are we going after this?" The room went completely still. Tanya turned to look at her daughter. She studied that face, the bright, curious eyes, the dimple on the left cheek, the small, serious mouth waiting patiently for an answer. She got down on her knees on the floor right in front of her daughter so that they were the same height. She held Jada's face gently in both hands. "You are going somewhere warm and safe, baby," she said. "Somewhere you will have food every day and a proper bed and people who will take very good care of you." Jada's eyes moved carefully over her mother's face. "Are you coming too?" Tanya opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "No, my love, I am not coming." For 1 second, Jada just stared at her, like the words were in a language she did not speak, and she was still translating them. Then her face crumpled completely. "No," she cried. "No, Mommy, please. Don't leave me. Please don't go." She threw both arms around her mother's neck and held on with everything she had. Her small fingers gripped the back of Tanya's shirt so tightly that the fabric pulled. Tanya wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her just as tightly. She pressed her face into Jada's neck. She breathed her in slowly. The smell of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the particular weight of her that Tanya had known since the day she was born. She memorized all of it, every single detail. She stored it somewhere deep and permanent inside herself. Then she gently unwrapped Jada's fingers from her shirt. One by one, she stood up slowly. She looked at Madison, who was standing against the wall with tears running quietly down her face. Their eyes met, and Tanya said the only thing she needed to say. "Love her." Madison nodded. She could not speak. Tanya turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Jada's voice rose into a full, desperate scream. Mommy. Mommy, please come back. Please don't go. Mommy. Tanya walked through the door, down the hallway, through the building exit, out into the cold Chicago air. She made it half a block before her legs gave out. She grabbed a nearby fence post with both hands and bent forward and cried so hard that no sound came out. Just her whole body shaking against that fence in the cold. Her daughter's voice followed her all the way home. It would follow her for 18 years. Life did not reward Tanya for what she did. It did not get easier or softer or brighter. It simply continued. The same hard, relentless grind. Day after day after day. She kept working the same kinds of jobs. Cleaning, washing dishes, serving food at small diners. She moved from one small apartment to another over the years. She never stayed anywhere long enough to make it feel like home. Because home was a feeling she had given away. She never married again. She went on 2 dates in 18 years. Both times she sat across from a perfectly decent man and felt absolutely nothing. Because the only person she had ever truly done everything for was gone. She never had another child. The thought never even formed properly in her mind. She had been a mother. She was still a mother. She was just a mother with nowhere to put it. Every year on Jada's birthday, Tanya performed the same quiet private ritual. She went to the small bakery 2 streets from her apartment. She bought 1 cupcake with 1 candle on top. She brought it home and placed it on the kitchen table. She lit the candle. She sat down across from it. And she talked to her daughter, out loud, in the empty room. You are 21 today, she said on one such evening. I wonder if you like birthdays. I wonder if Madison makes you a cake. She watched the candle burn. I hope somebody is celebrating you today. I hope you feel loved. I hope you are warm. She paused. I hope you do not hate me. Then she blew out the candle and sat in the dark for a while. She did that every single year for 18 years without missing once. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, Tanya was working the closing shift at a small diner on the south side. The place was nearly empty. Just 2 customers at the counter and the low sound of the television on the wall. Tanya was wiping down tables at the back when the television switched from a game show to the evening news. She was not watching it. She was thinking about whether she had enough money for the bus home or whether she would have to walk again. Then she heard a reporter say something that made her hand stop moving on the table. Tonight on Chicago's South Side, a remarkable young woman opens her doors to the city's most vulnerable children entirely free of charge. Tanya looked up at the screen slowly. A large, beautiful new building filled the frame. Cameras and reporters crowded the front steps. And in the middle of it all stood a young woman in a white doctor's coat. She was tall and confident and composed. She had neat natural hair and warm brown skin, and she was smiling at the cameras with the ease of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she was going. The reporter spoke over the footage. At just 28 years old, Dr. Jada Blake has become one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the entire country. Tanya's hand went completely still on the table. She straightened up slowly. She looked at the young woman's face on the screen, the shape of her eyes, the way her head tilted slightly when she smiled, the small dimple on her left cheek. The cloth in Tanya's hand dropped to the floor. She did not notice. She was already walking toward the screen, slowly at first, then faster, until she was standing directly underneath the television with both hands pressed against the counter, looking up with her mouth open. The reporter continued. Dr. Blake completed her medical training at only 27, making her one of the youngest pediatric surgeons in the country. Today she opens this hospital completely free of charge, dedicated entirely to children from low-income families who cannot afford medical care. Then Jada stepped up to the microphone. The crowd quieted, and she spoke. This hospital exists because of one woman. Her voice was warm and steady, but her eyes were glassy. A woman I have not seen since I was 10 years old. She paused and looked directly into the camera, like she was looking through it, like she was looking for someone specific on the other side of it. I do not know where she is tonight. I do not know if she is watching this. Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. But I need her to know that everything I am, every child I will ever save in this building, every single good thing in my life, came from the sacrifice she made for me." A tear ran down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "Mama, where are you?" The diner went absolutely silent. The two customers at the counter had turned around on their stools and were staring at the screen. The cook had come out of the kitchen and was standing in the doorway. Nobody moved, and Tanya Williams stood underneath that television screen with both hands pressed over her mouth and tears pouring down her face, making no sound at all. Just like the night she walked away 18 years ago. The tray she had been carrying was on the floor in pieces. She had not even heard it fall. By the next morning, Jada's speech had been seen by millions of people all over the country. Every platform, every channel, every conversation, people everywhere were moved by the young doctor who had stopped in the middle of the proudest moment of her life to search for the mother who gave her away. Jada gave interview after interview. She described what she remembered. The South Side of Chicago, a cold apartment, a mother who worked constantly and hugged tightly and always somehow managed to smile even when things were very bad. When Tanya heard that description on the radio while walking to work the next morning, she had to stop walking completely. She stood on the pavement in the cold and pressed her hand flat against her sternum like she was trying to hold something inside her chest in place. Every single person who knew Tanya told her the same thing. Go to her. Her co-worker at the diner said it over coffee before their shift. Her neighbor said it through the wall between their apartments. Even a woman she had never spoken to at the bus stop who had seen the news said it to her directly. That is you she is looking for, honey. Anyone can see that. But Tanya stayed quiet. And the reason was not complicated. She was not afraid of the cameras or the crowds or the public attention. She was afraid of one thing only. That Jada would look at her in person and feel something different from what she said on television. That underneath all those warm public words there was an anger that 18 years had not dissolved. That her daughter would look at her and see not a sacrifice, but an abandonment. Tanya could survive many things. She had proven that many times over. But she was not sure she could survive that. So she stayed quiet and watched from a distance as the world searched for her. 3 weeks after Jada's speech, a woman named Carol, who had worked beside Tanya at the diner for 6 years, made a quiet decision. She had stood in that diner and watched Tanya drop a tray and fall apart in front of a television screen. She had watched her come to work every day since then with red eyes and a face full of something unfinished. So one evening after their shift, Carol contacted a local journalist who was helping with the search. She did not ask Tanya's permission first. She did it because she had known this woman for 6 years, and she knew that sometimes the people we love most need someone else to open the door for them, because they are too afraid to open it themselves. When a social worker called Tanya 2 days later to tell her what had happened, Tanya sat on the edge of her bed for a very long time. She was not angry at Carol. She was terrified, but she said yes. On a Thursday evening after her shift ended, Tanya walked out of the diner into the cold night air. Snow was falling softly over the south side, the kind of soft, quiet snow that makes the whole city feel still. She stood under the light above the diner door and waited. Her hands were in her pockets. Her heart was doing something irregular and alarming inside her chest. Then a car turned the corner slowly and pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Jada stepped out. She was tall now, poised and confident in the way that comes from a person who has worked hard and become something real. She was wearing a long coat, and her breath made small clouds in the cold air. But when her eyes found Tanya's face across the pavement, everything composed about her shifted immediately. Her chin trembled. Her lips pressed together hard. Her eyes filled instantly, because she was looking at the face she had been searching for since she was 10 years old. Neither of them moved for a long moment. They just stood in the falling snow on opposite sides of 18 years of silence. Tanya broke first. Her voice came out cracked and barely audible. "I am so sorry." That was all she could manage. Just those 4 words. But they were enough. Jada crossed the pavement in 5 steps and wrapped both arms around her mother so tightly that Tanya felt the air leave her body. Tanya's legs gave out completely. She sank into her daughter's arms and cried in a way she had not cried since the day she walked down that hallway 18 years ago. Deep shaking soundless sobs that came from somewhere so far inside her they had no name. "I never wanted to leave you," she wept into Jada's shoulder. "I never wanted to. Not for a single second of a single day." Jada held her tighter and pressed her face into her mother's hair. She was crying too now, quietly but completely. "I know, Mama," she whispered. "I know." Tanya pulled back and looked up at her daughter's face through her tears. "How?" she managed. "How do you know that?" Jada wiped her mother's face gently with both hands, the way a mother would wipe a child's face, and she smiled through her own tears. "Because Madison told me everything before she died." In the final months of her life, Madison Blake asked Jada to come and sit with her. She was in a hospital bed by then, smaller and quieter than she had ever been in her life. But her eyes were clear and her voice was steady, and she had something important to say before she ran out of time to say it. She told Jada everything. The freezing apartment. The little girl who had not eaten properly in days. The mother who had walked miles through the cold every morning looking for work and coming home with nothing. The midnight phone call with the shaking hands. The room where papers were signed and a little girl screamed her mother's name down an empty hallway. Madison's voice broke twice while she was telling it. She pressed on both times. "She did not give you away because she did not want you," Madison said firmly. "She gave you away because keeping you is going to kill you, and she loved you far too much to let that happen." She reached under the bed with a slow, careful arm and pulled out an old, worn cardboard box. She placed it in Jada's hands. "I should have given you this a long time ago," she said quietly. "Not giving it to you sooner is the one thing in my life I am truly ashamed of." Jada opened the box. Inside were letters. Dozens and dozens of letters. All in the same handwriting. All addressed to Jada. All sealed and never sent. One for every birthday. One for every Christmas. One dated the September that Jada started secondary school, even though Tanya had no way of knowing the exact date. One that had no occasion written on it at all. Just 4 words on the envelope. "I miss you today." Jada looked up from the box with her hand pressed flat against her chest. "Why did you never give them to me?" Madison was quiet for a moment. Then she answered honestly. "I was afraid. You were so young and so fragile in those first years. I was afraid that reading them would send you searching for her before you were strong enough to handle what you might find." She reached out and held Jada's hand. "I kept telling myself I would give them to you when the time was right. And then the years went by, and I kept finding reasons why the time was not right yet." Her eyes filled. "I was wrong. I robbed you both of time that you deserved to have. And I am so deeply sorry for that." Jada sat on the floor of Madison's hospital room that night and read every single letter out loud to herself in a whisper. 18 years of her mother's handwriting. 18 years of love that had nowhere to go. "I wonder if you like school. I wonder what your favorite subject is. I hope you have a best friend who makes you laugh. I saw a little girl today who walked the same way you used to walk, and I had to sit down on the pavement for a while. You are 16 today. I cannot believe it. I hope someone is celebrating you the way you deserve to be celebrated. I am still here. I am still your mother. I will always be your mother." By the time she finished reading the last letter, the floor around her was wet with tears. She sat in the quiet of that hospital room and understood something so completely and so permanently that it would never leave her. Her mother had never stopped loving her. Not on a single day. Not even for a single hour. Not once. 4 months after the reunion in the snow, Jada invited Tanya to the official grand opening ceremony of Williams Hope Children's Hospital. Tanya almost did not go. She stood in front of her small bathroom mirror that morning in her best coat and told her own reflection 3 times that she did not belong there. That it was Jada's moment and Jada's achievement, and she had no right to stand beside it. Then she thought about 18 birthday cupcakes sitting on a kitchen table with 1 candle each. And she went. When she arrived, the building was surrounded by people and cameras and noise. Reporters on the steps. A crowd from the neighborhood filling the pavement. Children everywhere. Tanya stood at the very back of the crowd and watched it all from a distance. She was fine with that. She was just glad to be there. Then she felt a hand take hers. She turned. Jada was standing beside her in her white coat with her hair neat and her back straight. She had slipped through the crowd without anyone noticing. "You came," Jada said. "Of course I came," Tanya said. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Jada looked toward the front of the crowd. "Come with me." Tanya shook her head immediately. "Jada, this is your day. I should stay back here." "Mama." Just that one word, said in a voice that was quiet and firm and final. Tanya stopped talking, and she let her daughter lead her through the crowd to the front. When Jada stepped up to the microphone, the crowd settled into silence. The cameras turned. The reporters lifted their recorders. And Jada reached back and took her mother's hand and held it in front of everyone. 18 years ago, a woman in this city made a decision that the world did not understand. Her voice was clear and steady. She was alone, and she was desperate, and she was watching her child disappear in front of her eyes. And she made the most painful choice a mother can ever make. She let go of the person she loved most in this world, so that person could live. She turned and looked at Tanya directly. Tanya's jaw was shaking. Her eyes were full. She was trying very hard to hold herself together and failing completely. "Every child who walks through these doors," Jada continued, "and receives care they could never afford is alive because of what she sacrificed. Because without her there is no me, and without me there is no this." She turned back to the building. The large cloth covering the name dropped to the ground. Clean, simple letters carved into the stone above the entrance. Williams Hope Children's Hospital. The crowd erupted. Tanya stood completely still. She read the name once, then again. Then she put her face in both hands and wept. Not the silent, broken crying of a woman falling apart, but the full, deep crying of a woman being put back together. Jada put her arm around her mother's shoulders and held her up in front of all those cameras and all those people and all that noise. Just like Tanya had held her on the floor of that cold apartment 18 years ago. And Tanya Williams, who had spent 18 years buying birthday cupcakes, she never ate, and talking to empty rooms, and carrying a goodbye that never stopped hurting, finally felt it. Peace. Real and complete and long overdue. Peace. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who look like they left us. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the one that costs absolutely everything. And sometimes after years and years of silence and pain and empty rooms, love still finds its way home.